When managing file systems in Linux, an important tool to know about is the df command. Let's take a look at this command. df-h basically shows me a report of the file system disk space usage. As you can see, I have two partitions, SDA1 and SDA2. SD stands for SCSI device, and then A would be my first drive, and if I had a second one, it would be SDB, my second drive. If this were an ID drive, it would be HD, and then A would be the first one, B the second one, and so on. So here I have two partitions, SDA1 and 2. One is my boot partition, and 2 is my root drive. Now, if I want to edit these partitions or delete one or create a new one, there are two tools that I could use. I could use the parted tool, which if you read the notes, there is a good URL on how to do it with parted, and also the fdisk tool, which is what I'm going to use this case. Fdisk I find to be a little easier, so that's what I use. So the first thing I'm going to do is run the fdisk-l command to list all the partitions. And as you can see, this is basically similar to df-h in that it shows me SDA1 and 2, but here it also tells me that SDA1 is my boot partition. And it shows me that SDA3 is a swap partition that I have, which swap the device ID, the ID for a swap partition is 82. The ID for a Linux partition is 83. So here it shows me swap, uh, how many partitions that are swap I have. Another thing that it shows me is that my drive is 500, about 5 gigs, and it has 652 cylinders. And if you can see, we're only using up until 524, so we have available space on this drive. It's about 1 gig of what we have available. So let's go ahead and what I'm going to do first is delete this partition, this swap partition. Then I'm going to add another partition, and then I'll recreate the swap partition at the end of the drive. So let's try to do that. Fdisk and dev SDA to go to that device. If I type, that puts me at the command prompt for fdisk. In order to view what the commands I have available, I can type M for help, and that tells me all the commands that I have. In this case, what I want to do is delete a partition. I want to delete the swap from here and put my partition there, the partition that I'm going to add, which is a Linux partition right there, and then I'm going to put this swap again at the end. So before I do that, I'm going to quit and do a swap off dev SDA3 to remove, to basically unmount that that swap space, to take it off the pool of virtual memory or paging memory for the system. So I did that. So now I can go back to fdisk. Again, L will list all the types of partitions available. You can see here that swap is 82 and Linux is 83. So I'm going to do a D for delete. I'm going to delete partition number 3, and I'm going to write that to the disk with W. Okay, now I've deleted it and I've exited out of this, so I'm going to go back to fdisk. Now first I'm going to do an fdisk-L to see that it has deleted it, and indeed it has. It now only shows 2 partitions. So I'm going to go back to fdisk, fdisk dev SDA. This time I'm going to do I'm going to create a new partition. It's going to be a primary partition. The partition number is going to be 3 because this is my third partition. If you read the notes, you know that in x86 systems, you can create up to 4 primary partitions. Primary partitions are important because you can boot from these partitions. So the partition number is going to be 3. Now the first cylinder where I'm going to start is going to be 421, which is the next available cylinder, and that's fine. If you can see, the last partition went up to 420, so that's fine. Now I don't want to go all the way to the end to 652 because I want to leave some space for swapping. So I'm gonna actually go to 551. Okay, so now I'm gonna type W to write it. Okay, we'll wait for the disk to sync. And if I do fdisk minus L, now you can see that I have three partitions now, SDA 1, 2, and 3, and they're all 83 type ID, which is Linux. So now I'm going to go back to fdisk and create my swap partition. So I'm going to do a new. This one is going to be a primary partition. The first cylinder is going to be 652. The last cylinder is going to be 652. And now I need to go and do the type, which is T. And since it's a swap partition, I'm going to type 82. The partition number is 4. And 82 is the type. Linux swap. So now I'm going to write it. It's going to sync and write it to the partition table. Now if I do fdisk minus L, I should see all 4 of my partitions. So here is the one that I created, that is Linux, and here's the one that is swap. So now I can do swap on dev SDA4, and it doesn't find it for some reason. So let's try to format the SDA3. So make fs.ext3 dev SDA3. So this basically will create the file system and format it. So now the file system has successfully been formatted. So now that it's formatted, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this partition. So in order to mount, we need to take a look at the etc fstab file. The fstab file specifies all the mount points and information about the partition. So I'm going to try to mount it. First, I'm going to mount it manually just to double check. So I'm going to create a directory, make there tmp home, and I'm going to mount dev sda3 on this directory, tmp home. Okay, so now if I do a df-h, I can see that SDA3 has been mounted here. It's 3% full, and I have 746 megs available. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the contents of /home into this newly created partition, because then I'm going to go to the fstab file and tell it that home now is a new partition and it resides here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cp minus rp, so to keep the permissions, and recursively copy everything inside /home star into tmp home. Okay, there's not much there, so it's copied. So we'll go to tmp home, just verify that it's there. There's my student folder, which is what I wanted copied. So see, we'll just do an ls minus lah to verify that the permissions are correct, and they are. Student owns it, so that's good. So now I'm gonna unmount this from temp home, and I'm gonna vi etc fstab. Okay, so before I do that, since I don't have this swap anymore, I'm going to go ahead and comment this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of here. And I'm going to create a label for this home directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to /. I'm going to rename home old home, and I'm going to create a label for the current partition that I have. In order to create a label, we use the command e2label. So I'm going to do e2label, and I'm going to pass the device, which is dev sda3, and then the new name of the label, which is going to be home/home. So that created my label. So now I can go back to my etc fstab file and create an entry here. What I'm going to do is copy this line and add it there, and then just edit this line. So instead of boot, it's going to be home, and the label is home, which points to the SDA3 partition. The mount point is going to be home. It's an extended 3 partition, and I'm going to keep the defaults for the options, and 1 and 2 is fine there. So now I'm going to do an escape and save it. And now to mount everything under fstab, I can do a mount -a. Before I do that, I have to create the mount point home, which is just an empty mount point. So make there /home, because remember we rename home old home. So okay, I created it. Now I can run the mount -a command. If I look at the f-a, I should see that dev sda3 is now mounted as home. So if I go to /home, there is my student, and that actually resides on dev sda3.